Let Love In was, going back to sort of Tender Prey and Henry's Dream were kind of more like kind of low budget kind of 16 films you would see in 16mm. And Let Love In was probably like their first CinemaScope movie.
I think the word cinematic gets kind of overused in describing music, particularly in describing the Bad Seeds music. But how else do you even start to talk about Let Love In?
The actual landscape that's created by the different sounds that come together is amazing. And for some of the songs, for most of the songs, it's pretty much just getting lost in those soundscapes for that song.
For me, it's like being thrust inside a film, like actually on the set of a film, or in some kind of like where the artificial reality of a film becomes this kind of like engulfed, immersive virtual reality.
The Let Love In album in particular was recorded as a band, so to speak, so the instruments were all set up at the same time and the Bad Seeds were performing together.
It's just a really full-on record and really sort of groovy record.
That was a good session, a good record and good videos.
Yeah, that was amazing because Nick had moved at that point. He'd gone into living with Vivian in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
It's quite cinematic, the Do You Love Me one from memory. And that was all shot in Brazil in sort of bars with kind of naked women in them, really.
Another sort of underbelly world that I love to do research and explore all these weird characters and these locations. And Viv had some friends in the business that could take us around to show us all these places. And that was an amazing experience.
From the very first moment you hear the music, it kind of just captivated me entirely.
That was about one of only 2 songs I think I just about listened to for my entire last year of high school because I was so angst-ridden and in love with this girl that didn't love me. And when he says, "Do you love me?" you could hear him saying, "I want you." And I remember just wanting to let that girl get the message from the song.
It's still, for me, the best song I've ever heard in my life. It's one I listen to all the time, have as my ringtone.
Well, Do You Love Me would have been a song, Nick would have had that, he'd written that on the piano, I think, and he had the little da-da-da-da, would have had that piano thing, and, just got thrown to the group to play as so many of those things do, and in more recent times, Marty just started playing the bass line and there you go, it started sounding really good.
Yeah, I love playing bass.
I am ripping Martin Casey off at every opportunity I get.
Susie Quattro said, the guitar's for the head, drums are for the feet, and bass is right between the legs. Yeah. In fact, that's what inspired me to pick up the bass in the first place.
I remember when I first started playing bass, and there aren't that many girl bass players, and I'm hanging out with a lot of guys who are all in bands. They're all saying, fucking Liz Claypool, man, you got to get into Claypool and Flea and the guy from Interpol. I remember that coming up, and Peter Hook, and they're all these kind of superstar bass players.
All the great bass players, all my favourite bass players are probably not flashy types.
It's so subtle what he does. It's never too much, and it's never trying to show off. And it's never, he's never trying to be a superstar bass player, but it's so perfect. It's so exactly kind of the most beautiful thing that you could play.
One good thing about bass is if it's going well, you shouldn't really notice that it's there. It's just sort of powering things along.
He's just a solid pulsing bedrock, and it's just like he's consistent. He was probably the person who made the Triffids a great band, because I'd seen them before he joined, and it was just amazing the difference he made to them joining too. Like, they'd had bass players and they're competent, but I think Marty never lets the rhythm get away from him, or not that often. He does occasionally because I've seen him play drunk enough to know when he does it, but even then most people don't notice.
I guess what he always reminds me of is, you know, when your friend's drunk too much wine and you can see they're about to go over, but they haven't quite fallen yet. Like they're just kind of about to fall, but not quite. And he just reminds me of that. And his whole bass playing reminds me of that, actually.
I'm sort of the eye of the storm. I often find myself standing there and I'm kind of holding down the fort while all these people are just going completely nuts around me, you know.
I think in the 90s we came to have a more reliable band where there were musicians who were very strong and were capable of contributing more.
Everybody that ever played live then ended up being in the recording process, and so we were about a 7-piece at that time already.
I look around me and I just feel so lucky to be amongst these people.
Around that time, they were touring that album, but Blixer couldn't do a tour of the States, which was this monstrous great tour. Well, he probably didn't want to do this tour in the States because it was something like 48 gigs as a touring festival.
It was strange being knowing Blixer was a strong component of the band, and yet him being missing from such a pivotal tour. But it just went to show how malleable the band is and how it, you know, it can just be a very changeable thing.
Nick asked if I'd do play the guitar on the tour.
It was fun to play the songs off that album. They were all quite up tempo, the ones we were doing on that tour.
He was doing a gig in Berlin about 4 years ago, and at that time I was living in Berlin. So I heard him say to the crowd, here's a song I wrote for Johnny Cash, but I liked it so much I just thought, nah, I'm keeping that one for myself.
I think it's about Bunny, who was a girl that Nick was in love with for a while in Berlin, who died. But Anita's in there as well.
And that was Nobody's Baby Now.
It evokes different feelings if you know, or you think you know who something's about, or something refers to a particular incident you're familiar with, or like in Nobody's Baby, he talks about a particular dress that I know is Anita's dress, and the long-fingered hands. Anita had these amazing long fingers.
Nobody's Baby Now is so important to me because it got me through my best friend's death.
He does have this ability to touch things in people in a way, and it's definitely, he goes to the darker side, but he makes it beautiful.
It spoke to me in a way that sort of made me feel that I wasn't alone.
When he sings about moving through me even now, I think it really stays with you.
It was like an epiphany. It was just, yeah, okay, so this is what my crutch is going to be. I'm going to get through this with the help of music, and it's going to be Nick Cave.
I think Nick has a fantastic quality, his love songs, that they all have their own mood.
Well, the love songs and in the whole Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds universe, they seem more like stories. Like you can kind of separate the story from the man who's writing it.
Nick writes the best love songs. They're always the words are always good, but there's something simplistic about them, something that's really always heartfelt, and I think that's what always works. It's about getting emotions over and about passion, and sometimes the words can be intricate, sometimes they can be really simple, but somehow they work.
With the early records, it was all about the big gesture, which is what you are when you're young. It's like, when you're young, you sort of like things like Kiss, and you like all the explosions, and when, if you're trying to impress a girl or something like that, you might do it by trying to, jump your bike over that really wide ditch or something like that. But once you get older, you realise it's maybe the small gestures which can speak louder. So it's like if you start off quietly and then you've got somewhere to go, and that's probably really expressed pretty well in a song like Lover Man, where it just sounds really low and menacing, and then suddenly when it does take off, it's a much bigger kind of bang.
I just really liked, I mean, obviously I like the words on that song. I just really liked the atmosphere, but it was probably one of quite a few Nick Cave songs that I could have covered. It just, I just felt that one, maybe I could do something to and make it into a kind of more sort of an atmospheric thing.
When you're trying to cover someone else's songs, it's you almost have to pretend that you're writing them, and despite the fact you're singing someone else's tune and someone else's lyrics, you've got to find where you are in the song.
It's quite hard to cover Nick Cave. You have to really choose, I'm not saying I achieved anything as like the original, but it's not easy just to pick a song and cover it.
I think Metallica covered Lover Man too. I could be wrong. Not good.
I've always thought that would have been a much better sort of horror movie song than Red Right Hand, which, I mean, I can see why that was picked, but it's almost been overused now, and I've always thought that was the kind of one I would have used if I was making a horror movie.
There's a DVD collection that was released of most of the music videos, and I was just laughing watching it because, the band seems so intense, and, when somebody is that intense, you can, tend to think that they take themselves really seriously. But watching, what Nick and others had to say about their own videos, it was pretty clear that they thought it was more ridiculous than anyone could ever think it was.
We try to hypnotize the band, and it's all about susceptibility. Some people are really susceptible to being hypnotized, other people aren't. And it was really interesting seeing how the different personalities in the band responded.
The day before, I believe the Minister of Interior died of an amyl nitrate-filled orange being in his mouth, and he had a plastic bag over his head, and he suffocated in a process of self-inflicted masturbational excess in his house. And his secretary found him, and it was very hard for us to keep a straight face when the hypnotist was telling us, just imagine there is this nice orange. We all went.
Blixer was really hard to hypnotize, and we had to do endless attempts. And I think in the end, it worked because he so wanted to be hypnotized that he kind of sort of hypnotized himself.
You are, in a way, aware of where you are and what you're doing. You are willing to do that. And especially in the process of a film, which usually involves a lot of waiting time, it comes in very, very handy. Because you are in a state where you allow yourself to completely relax on a finger. No waiting time.
Lit 11 is an album that I can put on from start to finish and feel like I've been to some kind of therapy.
I think that there's a lot of brave songwriting on that record. There's a couple of throwaway tracks as well, which indicates a sort of, in itself indicates a kind of confidence.
To me, it's the perfect Bad Seeds record because it explores the earlier kind of American Gothic sound, but there's a songwriting quality to it that's much more mature than the first couple records, and it's probably one of the most exciting records to listen to all the way through. The pacing is phenomenal.
You do have absolutely stupid songs like Jangling Jack, which are, just shrugged off songs about some loser who walks into I think it's an English tourist, walks into a bar and immediately and just doesn't get it and winds up dead. It's not meant to be profound or anything, but it's very funny.
I think it's like the perfect pop song. It's like, what is it, 2 and a bit minutes?
I used to be quite nervous listening to Jangling Jack. It's I used to think it was this really out of place song, but I think it's a real fun, sort of mean song.
You can totally feel the idea of this angry, feral, fucking horny man going into this bar. And I love that line about I want a rinky dinky special and a little umbrella too. This sort of that surreal touch of it. This disgusting human being who's going to get shot, but he wants his little umbrella in his drink.
You do need to avoid being pretentious. I mean, rock music is dumb in a lot of ways as well, and you actually have to pay tribute to that aspect of it as well.
You can't imagine another group or another lyricist coming up with those little touches, and I think that's what makes those songs really stand out.
For particularly the 2 albums I worked on, there was a lot of creativity going into the sounds that were involved on the album, and I think Tony Cohen's got a lot to do with those mixes that were just wonderful, and that depth and sort of wide, sort of expansive sound that you get with the mixes because of the selection of instrumentation that they've used.
I remember that I, at that point, have incorporated a noise gate into my guitar setup, which I had triggered usually by the snare drum. That means I had a microphone at the snare drum that would go into that object called the noise gate, and by the signal coming from the snare drum, the noise gate would open up or close, permitting the signal of my guitar to pass through or not. So I would be able to go bang, that would be sounding like without the noise gate, but there's a snare drum going tuck, 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 and so the bang would not sound bang, but it would actually sound buck, 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 not buck like the snare drum, but it would actually sound bang, 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 bang in the beat of the snare drum.
I don't think many rock bands know how to be sparse with a guitar. It's something that I think Blixer was particularly good at knowing when not to play and when to play.
It's still the same thing, trying to play guitar like waiting for the bus. I would really love to just go, hello, not touching, I'm not doing anything, but you still hear me. And, it's and that's some of the result, and that's especially something I liked about Red Right Hand. I think it worked particularly well in that song.
Red Right Hand, for me, one of the interesting things I thought was when they used it on the Scream film soundtrack. I mean, I think it's on all 3 films, and there's a version of it on on the B-sides compilation from Scream 3, and it's more scary than anything in the film.
Throughout the movie, the setup was that the phone would ring, and you would hear a voice on the other line. And that voice was a voice telling you that you're about ready to die.
And then suddenly Red Right Hand comes on and it just tears the screen open. I mean, it's a really wonderful song. And I think it's something that you can really see coming to life. I mean, it's a very, very frightening, exciting song. And just the minute those bells go,
gong, and then you start hearing this creepy music coming in, it just was the perfect sound for this Ghostface character.
Nick actually writes about his songs once he's written them. So in Nick Cave's collection, you can actually see where he sort of writes about all the sort of landmarks that this sort of ghostly figure walks through in the song. He sort of describes the landscape of the song in quite a lot of detail.
Of course, the movie came out and was a huge hit in America and the rest of the world. And we then were forced very fastly to do Scream 2 and Scream 3. And we realized very early on that we wouldn't be able to do those 2 films without using that song, The Red Right Hand, again as the theme for our Ghostface Killers. So that Red Right Hand appears in all 3 Scream movies.
And I think it also cropped up in the X-Files, Red Right Hand. I'm pretty sure it was the first ever non-commissioned piece of music used in the X-Files, which I think for X-Files geeks was quite an exciting moment.
It's a song with a lot of mystery for me, and although Nick talks about that being a sort of ghostly sort of figure walking through this city, I kind of have in my mind's eye that that's actually Nick himself walking through. these streets, discovering these streets and writing from the first person.
The character in that song felt like the same character in the movie that we associated with, that the Ghostface killer in the Scream trilogies was basically somebody who thought they had something done wrong to them and that they were coming back to seek vengeance.
I don't know, when you hear that song on albums and you hear it performed live, there's such a fantastic sort of, I don't know, beat and rhythm and, I suppose, drama.
I remember going to see him at the Apollo in Hammersmith about 5 years ago with a band I was working with at the time, and a couple of them, they were a bit younger, and a couple of them hadn't seen them before, and we were sitting in very exceptional seats right up front, and I just remember thinking, I can't wait till he plays Red Right Hand.
Nick came up to the front, and as he does pointing, he's like, points at me and goes, "You don't like your hat? He'll get you a new one. You don't want no hat." And he changed the lyrics for that little bit of Red Right Hand to be all about my ugly hat. And I was so overwhelmed. Everyone was looking at me going, in my mind, everyone was looking at me going, "Wow, you're so awesome. He sang about you."
It was, it's a song that every time I hear it, I still get the same excitement as the first time I heard it.
Again, Nick sort of strides over. We're sitting in the front row, and he points at the girl I'm sitting with and says, "You don't like that guy you're with? He'll get you a new one." And it's exactly the same point in the song, and I thought, there must be something special about that song and me that he wants to make fun of me during that little bit every time. I do take it personally. I take it on board, but in a good way.
It felt as if he was taking on the entire first 5 rows of the crowd with that song, and just being mesmerized by this kind of demonic display of this very tall, lanky, possessed gentleman right in everybody's face, fearless, with the band behind him not missing a beat.
The seeming friendship, the exchanged smiles between the band members when they're just nodding at each other. You just think, oh God, I'd love to be in that band. I'd love to be in that band. And you do get that feeling of, sometimes when you go and see bands, you just go along and admire them. And for me, and an awful lot of people I know, when they go and see Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, they're watching it thinking, I just want to be in that band. That looks like the band to be in.
You kind of feel a shift in the audience. I mean, that's what I really like about what this band can do. It's sort of like a backbone slips and everybody in the room becomes a bit cooler than they were before. And I love that. I love that music, and particularly this band and this music, can have such a sort of physical, such a kind of psychological effect on you when you're engulfed by it.
It's that thing where the song is serving the narrative and doesn't rely on things to hook the listener in a cheap way, other than stick around because the story gets better and darker and more powerful.
I think one of the most interesting sounds in the song for me is the oscillator played by Nick. So it's essentially one of the most boring scientific approaches to a sound you could get, a pure tone.
If you run into musicians, the temptation is always to ask them, how did you do that? Because usually instruments lose their power. They sound brilliant in the room, and by the time it's on tape, something's gone.
You count on these people to capture what you're doing, which sounds easy, but it isn't. It's actually, it can, you can lose it. You can lose not only the sounds, you can lose the energy.
The desk proved not to be musical enough, so we pulled in an old piece of equipment from out in the back room that was a much larger oscillator with a great big knob, so you could get access to a little bit more frequency range and a bit more sort of musical control, if you like. And Nick's put a couple of little Chinograph markers where he thought appropriate bends to the right pitch would occur, and then just lost himself in the melody and gone for it that way. So it's interesting to see the processes involved in piecing together those sorts of atmospheres, and then taking it one step further, obviously, then into the mixing environment where Tony would embellish on those ideas and create wonderful depths.
I think Tony Cohen's production on that's quite brilliant.
Tony Cohen is the unproducer. That's why he is good.
There's obviously a lot of clever studio work, and
he's managed to make it sound so dynamic and immediate, which is it's not an easy thing to do, even with this great live band, to create a record that is that vital.
The thing of that is sonically is just this great. It reminds me of a Bernard Herrmann kind of Hitchcock score, and the use of all the classical percussion, all the timpanis and bells and organ stabs.
I don't know, there was the idea to have this bell, ne? Red Right Hand, ne? Boing, it's a sound, it's like a Morricone record, ne? When you have this, do you know what's going on? This was quite funny. Yeah. To me, it sounds like it's recorded in a blacksmith sort of workplace or I don't know, the vestry of a church or something with the bell ringing. It's got this amazing feel to it, but after a while you stop noticing that, and you're just listening to the story and the way the narrative builds. And to me, that's quite a mark of a writer, to be able to just pull you along with the words alone.
The lyrics are so narrative, and the characters, and so visual.
Like the Let Love In song, it starts, I think, despair and deception, love's ugly little twins.
So you have these emotions, he's not saying, you deceived me, or you made me despair. These emotions come as characters, become characters who come knocking on the door.
It's not the most dramatic of songs, but lyrically it just blows my mind. There's one line that always stays with me. Far worse to be love's lover than the lover that love has scorned. I mean, what a great use of the word love.
The kind of the negative protestation of love, it's really, really well done.
It's something that I think most people who have been jolted out of a relationship by a bad breakup, I think everybody can relate to it in the sense, but you're looking at love in a different perspective as a character.
The genius of the song being in the turnaround, but never has my tormentor come in such a cunning disguise. Pause, beat, punchline, I let love in. It's just incredibly moving.
It reaches places that very few things do. That's it. Because it's not only in the head, it's everywhere.
I didn't actually get into Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds until about, I think, 94, 95. The album Let Love In, I remember going downstairs to my brother's bedroom and finding the CD on his bookshelf. He wasn't there. And I thought that the cover was amazing.
Fuck, I know, that's such an amazing, and I love how colorful it is. That cover is another example when people say they want something dark and they think that it needs to be black or gray. I think, don't forget how dark this Technicolor world can be, and it's so exciting when you manage to make something beautiful into something sort of horrifying and sexy and graceful at the same time, and I think that cover really does that for me.
That photo shoot actually was shot in Melbourne, and at the time Courtney Love was doing the festival circuit, I think, with Nick. I was supposed to be photographing her as well, and it didn't happen because she was so out of it. But Nick showed up. It was actually the most painful shoot I've ever done with him.
And I think the photo that ended up being on the sleeve was an accident, if I remember rightly. It was just that wasn't the idea at all. I can't remember what the idea was.
He sort of wanted to kind of have fire all around him. So we did that through lighting, and I actually got someone to help me because it's not my normal kind of approach to things.
It certainly wasn't the idea originally to have Let Love In on Nick's chest.
It was a really stressful shoot because Nick really didn't have a lot of faith in what I was doing, and the results, are just miraculous.
It's another cover that is just such a perfect opposite. It's like this, it's so romantic, of course, like Let Love In, and then it just seems like, like someone's about to be pushed off the edge of a building. It's so exciting.
And yeah, I love those photos and I love that album.
I love those songs. I love Thirsty Dog. Sorry. They're absolutely great.
It makes me think of a boyfriend of mine where I'd actually had to go to the hospital because
you know, we had this fight and a piece of glass went through my foot.
I'm sorry about the hospital. Some things are unforgivable. And you don't really want to know what that's about. And it might be real and it might have really happened to it and it might not, but that doesn't really matter. It's scary enough. You get the feeling that within that one little line, there's another song. There's possibly a movie in that one line.
It just always rings so true. I remember just weeping my eyes out in the hospital from this boy, but then we get back together again, and you know, and then you're sitting in the bar, or maybe we're both sitting in the bar, and it's just so like passionate but so sick at the same time.
That particular line is that perfect moment of what I think Nick Cave does very well, which is that he alludes to something scary. He alludes really well to stuff that you don't really want to go there. And it's kind of like an early cartographer saying, here be dragons. He's the person that he's, you know, let him worry about slaying the dragons and he'll just come and tell you where the boundaries are.
Yeah, that got me across America in a van with a lot of kind of irritating moments. We were touring and there's no better way to escape someone who's drinking like 1.5 litres of Mountain Dew and throwing things at the back of your head than put on Thirsty Dog really loud and not be sorry at all.
Other songs on that record, Lay Me Low. I just love the degenerate character reading his own eulogy, basically. So dramatic in a kind of drama queen kind of way.
It has this air of doomed magnificence. And this is Nick at his finest, as a kind of troubadour of trouble, of a kind of crooner of catastrophe, but also is so funny. And I know everybody now says, oh, Nick Cave is funny and all the rest of it. But I mean, he was hilarious from the word go. I never understood why people didn't see the humour in his work.
The humour comes out best in those songs when you kind of least expect it.
I was amazed by the second Do You Love Me, the last song on the record. I think that's an astonishing achievement. I don't know why I should have been astonished after, by then, 10, 12 years of exposure to Nick, but I thought that was a really brave piece of bold as well as brave piece of songwriting.
Lyrically, just blown away. The images of dark cinema and a pedophile and the sound of an ape, you know, like grunting and groaning.
What I like about it is the reuse of the chorus line, do you love me? And you don't really know who's saying it. It would make most sense if it was the victim, but I think there's a little sympathy for the monkey as well, or the monster.
It's really quite striking and emotional and disturbing and even shocking in its own way, because basically there's the scenario in a cinema. This is just even the lyric.
But the music of it is fantastic as well, the violin lines. And I think that's actually probably the first time that Warren plays with the Bad Seeds. He's kind of like a session musician there. But the arrangement of the second Do You Love Me is amazing.
That's definitely stuck with me to this day, the whole scenario of the song. The original Do You Love Me is, you know, it's pretty rampant in its own way, but this is just like an inverted version of the same song.
It's full of experience and a sadness, but also a character that embraces their own reality. But it's also done extremely cohesively, succinctly. There's no filler lyrics in that song at all. It's poetical and it says what it needs to say.
The thing that I like about music like Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds music is that I can go on a journey with it. So I can, classic, what I used to do when I was 16 is I'd storm into the house, storm into my bedroom, throw my shit around, light some candles, grab the bourbon from under my bed that my parents didn't know about, chuck on Nick Cave, and I would go from being absolutely furious to numb to calm to, okay, I can face the world now. And Let Love In was that album for me.
It's sort of one of those records that
it sticks with you. And there's times when you can be, you know, I've listened to that sort of walking along the Thames at night, and you just get totally lost into that record. And so you can sometimes start sort of dancing along the riverbank to it, which is probably makes you look like a maniac. But it's a lot of their albums, I find, and particularly that one, you just get taken in by it. It's a all-encompassing experience that you rarely get, really, I think, with many artists. But it's just that sort of intensity and that sort of exploring feelings of evil or sort of temptation, lust. They allow you to go on this little journey into yourself.
To have such a journey on one album, I think it's really special.
I mean, it's kind of just a phenomenal record, front to back. It's hard to say much about it because I think the record speaks for itself, and I want to be able to do it justice with my own words, but I think that's kind of impossible.
I go where no man before me bothered to go, till the soles of my shoes are shot full of holes, and it's all downhill with a bullet. This rambling and roving is taking its course. I'm grazing with the dinosaurs and the dear old horses, and the city streets crack and a great hole forces me down. My soapbox, my pulpit, the theater ceiling, the silver star spangled, and the coins in my pocket go jingle.